Vår tid or New is the latest full-length album from Alfahanne, however you pronounce that in Swedish. It is a Swedish, I guess we would call them a rock band, a heavy rock band. They call themselves an alpha apocalyptic rock band, and we could call that, uh, I guess, black metal musicians making heavy rock music, which is very much in line with the development of black and roll music and uh, pre 1990 black metal as well in terms of its pacing and movement. This band has always had their own sound and style, which has been very consistent on all of their albums, apart from the vocal performances, which feature a lot of guests on each record. And I wouldn't say their aesthetic is necessarily typical for black and roll. It's a little bit like garage rock, a little bit just sort of general rock, and the aesthetics of the band aren't all that interesting, I would say, for someone who's interested in the more detailed and thought out and convoluted presentation of metal and whatnot. So this is very much music for a larger crowd. I would say they popped up around the time where bands like Feller Talk and Shining and whatnot were kind of at their sort of peak interest in terms of breaking out into more of a mainstream notice. But these folks, their general starting point was in the 90s black metal scene. And I would say melodic black metal, as well as some other groups, as well as folk rock and neo folk later on. So if you look back to like the discography of Cyclic Law and Cold Meat Industry, you find that some of these folks, they were in neo folk groups essentially. And where this band comes from is basically seems to be, let's put a simple rock beat, some heavy rock guitars, some post-punk influences in there, as well as a little bit of the heaviness and grit of black metal somewhere in mind. That's where they came from. It is their sort of modus where they began. But they sort of said this band started when they basically stopped listening to black metal, and that means that this is not downtrodden. It's kind of upbeat. It's a little, but it's singing about the end of the world in most cases. So it's a juxtaposition which is not abnormal for Scandinavian music to feature something that is a little bit kicked about, upbeat, almost garage rock level in its treatment of rock and roll and that movement, but also completely dark in everything that it says and in a lot of its dirging movements. It's a lot of explanation for something that you'll just kind of get right away. And most of their songs are written in a very simple, straightforward style that is fairly repetitive in its composition. So you'll get it within a few songs on most of their records. I don't think that too much has changed in that regard in terms of the rhythms, the beats on this record. But if you're familiar with their previous work, you know what the general persona of the band is. We'll check out a song here, and I'll show you what's kind of decidedly different about this record in some ways. So the big change on this album is the vocalist. The vocalist has changed his style a little bit. Per is a vocalist. He's an artist and whatnot, and he featured in Winterland, in the kind of core trio of Winterland early on, as well as the development of Maze of Torment up through their first full length. And his vocals in this band had always been a little bit more high pitched. They were certainly not black metal vocals, I wouldn't say at any point, but they had black metal vocalists along the way that brought in their own style on guest spots throughout their discography. And on this record, there are not only more black metal vocalists here that use pretty gruff examples of their vocals that are exaggerated, but his vocals as well take that tone, while the guitar work is written in a way which is much more relevant to black metal. So this is kind of it's their first black and roll record from my point of view, while they're not exactly fully going there either. And there's not a lot of new variety introduced in the structure, the rhythmic structure of these songs. So really we get, scaling almost melodic black metal guitars worked into their sound in a very effective way. I probably wouldn't have reviewed or talked about many of their previous records, even though I enjoyed the first one a bit at the time, back in 2014 or so, whenever it was. This is something that's a little bit more relevant and maybe a little bit more engaged and aggressive in the way that it's put together, that it hooked my interest, and it had enough variety in terms of the vocal melodies they presented and just sort of the anthemic stomp of it all. I would say this is not the most charismatic record so much as it is just an interesting nuke they kind of set off throughout the whole thing. It's an interesting record. Especially as they break up the beats here and there. There's a couple of slow blasted parts. There's a couple of, like I said, they're pushing the right to the edge of what might be considered black and roll or black metal, and that is more than the vocals along the way. So that's really all there is to this record. I really didn't have that much to write about it because apart from a couple of pretty strong steel guitar kind of sliding parts in a couple of songs, there isn't much here that's going to surprise you as a fan other than the inclusion of the black metal interest, which was always kind of adjacent to begin with. So what I would say is that this is maybe their best version of that thus far, because the production values are stronger, the songwriting is a little bit more catchy, and the guests, it seems like they've written some of these songs around the guests. Now, they aren't the most catchy pieces, but they seem to be the most substantial pieces in terms of how they're written and put together, with some of the longer songs featuring, like the vocalist from Sorhen or Nordjebel. So I really got into that, the juxtaposition of the catchier songs kind of being the band's own and the guest spots being more involved, substantive pieces. So, yeah, I mean, see if that's to your taste. I know that black and roll is not for everyone, and this is not exactly even black and roll, depending on where you draw the line. But I had a good time with this record. I found it was catchy. It wasn't offensively, accessible and cheesy at any point, but it was a good time, and a lot of great guitar playing on here too. So check it out if that's even remotely your thing. And that's out on last week, so it's already out. You can check it out and read my review if you'd like more information.